Welcome, one and all, to another Continuing Conversations. I'm Michael Dismuke. I'm a freelance writer for Star Trek Adventures and lead writer on Captain's Log, solo RPG, in addition to being a blogger on Continuing Missions since 2018. You walked onto our show today. This is episode number 145, if you can believe it. Last week, we started talking and breaking down Star Trek Adventures 2nd edition with some of our writers. But the next 3 weeks, this week, next week, the week after, we actually have with us the actual game designer, Nathan Dowdell, who's been on our show before. So we're going to be breaking it down today. And of course, there ain't no breakdown unless you have your breakdancing partner, and that's Jim Johnson.
Hey everybody, my breakdancing days have long since passed me, but that's all right. Hey everybody, I'm Jim Johnson. I'm the project manager and line editor for the Star Trek Adventures RPG, the Captain's Log solo RPG, and the Buffer Time Lower Decks card game that'll be coming out this fall, hopefully. And been working with Michael, co-host on this show for 145 episodes. Wow, that's crazy. We're gonna have to start thinking about, do we want to do anything special for 150, or do we just plow on through and drive toward 200? I'm not sure what we want to do there.
200.
So having a lot of fun talking STA these last 7.5 years. Now we've got 2nd edition. We're going to talk all about 2nd edition today, and we have a very special guest who's been with us before, and happy to have him back again. Nathan Dowdell, please introduce yourself, sir.
Hi, I'm Nathan Dowdell. I'm the lead 2D20 system designer and developer for Modiphius Entertainment, and the lead designer for Star Trek Adventures, both 1st and 2nd edition.
Awesome. Thank you, Nathan. And before we jump into talking about Chapter 4 and so on for the 2nd edition core book, I think you mentioned it on a couple of the other either episodes or the AMA we did a while back on Discord. But just I was curious, just to refresh my memory and just to refresh our audience's memory who haven't heard some of the other interviews. Like, what was your curiosity level, excitement level, thought process, whatever, when we decided to go forward with the 2nd edition? Because I think this is one of the first games we've done at Modiphius that actually got another edition to build on.
Yeah, it was. The first game that I worked on for Modiphius was a 3rd edition of another game, but it was another game that another publisher had originated, which is Mutant Chronicles. So this is very much the first time that I've worked on a 2nd edition of a game that I'd worked on before, but also the first time I've ever done a 2nd edition of one of my own games, which was quite a task, because I think when designing 1st edition, the only person that with any real expectations that I had to live up to was myself. Obviously, my colleagues around me, but we didn't have an audience, at least not one that hadn't yet been convinced to try the game. And when I started it, nobody outside of Modiphius knew that it even existed. We didn't announce it until a little while after I'd already started work on it. So 1st edition was very much focused on making a game with up to my expectations for what a Star Trek game could be and should be. 2nd edition had all the additional weight of 7 years of a huge community and considerable success, for any RPG that isn't Dungeons and Dragons. That was a weight, because I had to try and thread the needle between what I would like to have done completely blue skies if I had complete freedom, and what the community wanted out of the game and what the company wanted out of the game. And suddenly for considering how little of the game changed, how much of the game was already there and already solid and already working, it was a real challenge to make 2nd edition, because it needed to hit so many boxes and there were so many people with so many expectations about it.
Yeah, I mean, you were really active over the years, getting feedback and receiving feedback, and giving feedback back to the community. That it's rare. Everyone comments about how rare it is to have a game designer, or project manager, or the writers instant response on stuff. So I'm sure you had. Did you keep a written list of notes, or did you keep that somewhere, because you had got so many ideas over the years? How did you keep that all in your head?
I have eclectic piles of notebooks and various Word documents and OneNote pages and various things like that that all form an eclectic mass of note taking. Plus, I've generally got a pretty good memory, and especially if I've written something down, I tend to remember it because it's gone through my head already. Yeah, just reading it doesn't necessarily stick in the same way as processing something and then writing down a version myself because I've had to think about it. And so a lot of stuff can come from memory, because I've got that kind of brain,
Yeah, and I love
which
hearing
has
that.
been an asset over the years.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and the fans too. There's was that minor burp of dispute about 1E through 2E, or concern, I should say, about whether it's compatible. We know it's backwards compatible now. I think as a gamer who this is the one game I play on the regular. It's so cool seeing those ideas incorporated in that have been talked about for years. I mean, really, we built the game too with the fans. Like when I read, I'm like, wow, this is because we played and we posted and we talked and we asked Nathan, and then seeing these things incorporated in, I'm sure I'm reflecting, and what I've seen on social media, how happy people are with the streamlining, and that Modifius and yourself, Nathan, listen to what, the evolution that the fans are pushing the game toward.
Yeah, my brain is not as well organized as Nathan's, so I tend to forget things if I don't have it right in front of me. Especially because I've got so many projects I'm working on. I purge the old one, I start on the new one. I purge the old one, I start on the new one. So what I got into the habit of doing before the development team really truly came online within the last couple of years, is if I would see a comment online or something, I would cut and paste it into a document, and then gradually, when we switched over to the Google suite, I started a little chat for myself, and I would just put errata or questions or notes in there. And a lot of times Nathan's answers would go right in there too, because like he had already answered them, right? So I would just drop the answer right in there too. And sometimes that errata we would be able to apply to the books that were actively out or whatever. We would update the PDF. Or the print edition if we were lucky. But then within the last couple of years, the dev team created that errata form that fans can go log into on Google and add in the errata and submit it, and then we can look at it that way and collect it that way. But I mean, really, second edition, truly, I mean, huge piece of it is Nathan having the opportunity to make the changes he wanted to make to it, right? But we got so much fan feedback over the last 7 years that we wanted to make sure we could implement what we could of it that made sense to include. So
Man, Jim,
really,
I would love to take that document that you collect over the years and drop that into a chat bot and ask, hey, summarize this for me. And then you could show that to people how much advice you got that ended up in the book. That'd be so
gosh,
cool.
that'd be an interesting project. Yeah. But I just want fans to understand, especially newer fans who may not understand the backstory, right? Is that second edition, like so much of this was built on the comments and feedback we got over the years. So it's not just Nathan, building up second edition, but which is great, especially because you've had such great opportunities to work on other 2D20 games, and you've been able to cross pollinate so much stuff, which is super cool to see. But in true Star Trek fashion, right? The fans have been a key piece of this for a long time now, and I'm just grateful that the fans gave us the opportunity really to do a second edition. Because again, putting on my Ferengi globes, if the sales weren't there, we wouldn't have done a second edition. We would have probably kept trooping on with supplements for first edition. But the opportunity was there, and a bunch of different market things converged to bring it together. So
Good. Great. And so we're here to talk 2E today. And so we're going to be focusing today on last week, of course, we did chapters 1 through 3 and the mission module Gorgon's Gaze. I do that every time I say it. And this time we're going to focus on chapters 4 through 6 with Nathan. So get us started, Nathan. Talk to us just high level about character creation, maybe some of the things that it's chapter 4, reporting for duty, some of the things that struck you when you started down this path.
So character creation was one of those areas that I didn't really want to touch too much, because or at least beyond refinements. Yeah, a bit of polish was really all it needed, because not only was it something that had worked, but it was something that had been really popular, especially the life path character creation, which draws a lot of positive attention. People like the way that it can produce a character for them. Building them up step by step and piece by piece until they've created something more solid. It arguably overshadows the creation and play option, which I don't see getting as much attention, which is a little bit of a shame. But for the most part, character creation, the intent was to leave it pretty much as is, and just refine the way that we presented it, and make a few tweaks here and there to clean it up and emphasize certain elements. I think one of the bigger changes that was made was to the character species, obviously, who now have a distinct character species ability, in order to help give a stronger feel and a stronger kind of character identity to each of the species, because the stat boosts and the access to talents alone wasn't quite getting it there, and it helped us avoid the annoying little problem of mandatory talents that some species had but other species didn't, which had also caused a bit of confusion over the years. I've lost count of how many times I've heard people asking for an option for trill characters that wasn't joined, or the other one said, "We know you could choose not to take either talent," but at that point, how much trill is left in the character?
Yeah.
How much is distinct about the character? So it solved a problem. It also helped us add a bit more emphasis, and it's one of those areas where having something visceral that gives you an actual, that gives you a bit of a feel of something in play, beyond just the numbers, is really valuable, even if it's just something small.
Well, let me ask you too. This is new, because you can have up to basically your starting character 6 talents, because you would have your 4 normal, you have your species talent. Now you have, say, if you're a commander or an engineer, you get that talent. So
the role benefits were already there in first edition as well.
Correct.
So
true.
Again,
so you had 5.
Yeah,
you're right.
Yeah, that's only really just one extra.
Good point. I think that was nice that you clarified it this time.
And often these species abilities are relatively minor, but they're punchy. They have a little bit of add a little bit of texture to the character, and lets you feel that, okay, I'm playing an Andorian, and thus that feels distinct from playing a Vulcan, from playing a Klingon, from playing a Bajoran. And I've seen a few people that are already quite excited by the potential shenanigans of the Bajoran's Will of the Prophets ability.
Those must have been fun for you to create, huh?
They were, actually. A little bit tricky at times, trying to find enough information to get that kind of one defining ability that's not going to be too stereotypy, but also getting to play around with those concepts and coming up and putting in little references like the fact that the human one is called Faith of the Heart, which was cool. That was a placeholder. I fully intended to go back and find something better for it later, and we just never found something better.
Yeah, that was really good. That was perfect.
We needed to put the love in there for the Enterprise fans.
Yeah, exactly.
A little tongue-in-cheek. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. Anything more on talents before I have a question about one of the things that was changed too?
So obviously, character creation, obviously we've added in a load of extra options that hadn't already existed, mainly extra career options for people other than Starfleet officers. And we went through, we polished up all the talents, grabbed a load of talents from other books and brought them all back into the core, so that characters have got plenty of options, and then added in pastimes, because it was always a fun thing that I found when I took the quick start pre-gens to conventions for demo games, was that all the players always spotted that the sixth focus that was always on all of those characters is just a hobby. And I thought, well, why not lean into that? Let player characters put one on specifically put one on the character sheet, make space for it, so that every character has got something, and it doesn't take away from the things that the character can be good at professionally as well.
I like it. Let me tell you why narratively we've liked it in our game so far is it reminds you that when your character's off time, what are they spending their time doing? So to me, it's just a nice little jog reminder that I'm like, hey, go to your, what are you doing in relation to your pastime? And let's have a little story around that. So I think that's really cool.
Yeah, and I think it reminds me, or hopefully it reminds people that an RPG is different than a TV show in that you have the ability to do some of those off camera things that you wouldn't see on the show necessarily. Even though we see Picard, mess with his archaeology, and we see plenty of characters play musical instruments or do theater or something. Having that pastime on your character sheet means that you could do an entire game session with your group doing nothing but hobbies and pastimes, right? And still make it a useful part of the show. And Nathan, I think I cut you off. My apologies.
And obviously, it provides extra role-playing options. One thing that I had considered that I don't think ever really made it into the drafts was leaning into the idea of if you do your pastime, maybe you get your stress back a bit faster. But I thought that was a little bit over mechanistic. But yeah, if you take a short,
you said it now.
If you take a rest, if you take a rest and choose to lean into your pastime, then okay, maybe get an extra point of stress back.
I like that. I actually really like that. That we may have to do a little continuing mission add-on article about that. That's kind of cool. Now, speaking of stress, that's the perfect segue. Because why did you change it? First of all, I like it. I think a lot of people like it. Why did you make it so that stress is now just the person's fitness and not fitness plus security?
A big chunk of that was so I have run more game demos than I can count now. I've done 3 separate years of Destination Star Trek, a 3-day convention, running hour-long demos of the game. I've done the same demos at UK Games Expo and Dragon Meet in a few different years. I've run basically the same demo. It's a stock demo that's simple but also relatively flexible, so I can reflavor it if I need to keep myself engaged. And then it involves a bit of combat, a bit of an action scene, a bit of a crisis that can be over and done with in an hour. And a away team beams aboard a stricken ship. They've got to get the engines powered back on, but oh no, Klingons have beamed aboard. Now you've got to fend them off while restarting the engines. And that's fair enough. But having run that number of that quantity of combats, I had found that the old damage system that we'd used previously just felt a little bit too. The characters felt a little bit too like things would just bounce off them. Like they had too many hit points. They could soak up too much damage during a fight, and it still felt too much like hit points for my taste. Even if there were differences, even if you got the 5+ damage goes straight through and deals an injury, it still felt more like hit points and more like characters tanking a phaser blast to the face.
So you were like less is more in this case.
Yeah, I wanted characters to have a little bit more peril when it came down to the phaser fights. And I went back to an idea that I'd had during the early development of First Edition, whereby if a character was attacked, they suffered an injury, but they could pay to avoid that injury. And it was normally you spend momentum or you add to threat to avoid that injury. And that was the initial draft of it. And we tried it out a bit, and it didn't. Back then in First Edition, during my own initial testing, it never quite works. And I tried it again early in playtesting for Second Edition through our internal tests in our new design studio. And it wasn't quite working. But what had worked was a similar system that I'd put into place in Dreams and Machines, one of our other games, whereby player characters have a pool of in Dreams and Machines they have a pool of spirit, which is also what they use to buy bonus dice instead of momentum and threat. We've rearranged how the currencies work there. So it's kind of like the character's personal drive, and they can use that to either bolster themselves or to avoid injuries. And I basically repurposed the injury avoidance part of that, renamed it as stress to keep it in line with what we'd had before, and basically just used that mechanic because it fit what I wanted out of this updated damage system.
It works. I mean,
it still took a number of iterations to get to the final state. I agonized over this quite a way because there were 3 or 4 different drafts that just either they felt too fiddly, or they were too easy to exploit, or they just didn't click. And this version, I think, this version works.
Hey,
I'm settled with it. So
we had a fan on continuing mission, Stephen James, who today, in fact, it just posted today. This is August 10th when we're taping this, where he was able to get it into a diagram how the damage stress works, and it's so easy the way you fill it out. If you have a chance to look at it, it's a really cool system. But I know we've played it in our game, and it makes the narrative go quicker, and especially if you're choosing to avoid the injury, how you add stress to that. If you avoid an injury, now you have to create a narrative explanation as to why. That was in the old system too, but now it's really pulled in. Like if you're not dying, you have to explain what's going on. Maybe you weren't hit. Yeah. So I thought it was a really nice streamlining of that.
So I did see that flowchart. I did leave a comment on the Facebook group because there is one minor element, is that when you're fatigued, while you can't regain your own stress by spending momentum, other characters can spend momentum to regain your stress for you. So essentially, you can't pick yourself up when you're fatigued, but another character can come along, help you to your feet, dust you off, and get you back into the fight.
All right, Stephen, we'll be looking for an update to this chart, and I'll put it up. Thank you for that. See, how amazing is it? We just put that up this morning, and already we have the game designer saying, oh, by the way, and making our games better. That is sweet.
Please state the nature of the gaming emergency.
And that's something I want new fans to appreciate as well. I mean, not appreciate, but just realize that we hear your feedback, we see your feedback, because we're on the socials all the time, whether it's the Modifius Discord or some of the unofficial ones like the subreddit and the Facebook groups and stuff. So and honestly, I've talked about this before. I've been in such a Star Trek Adventures bubble for the last 7 years. I don't really know what other game companies do in terms of like whether their designers and writers are super active on social media like we are. But just, for the purposes of Star Trek Adventures, know that Nathan's out there, I'm out there, Michael's out there, a lot of the other freelancers are out there watching and reading. And we're talking, behind the screens, right? So constantly, like, Michael always says, it's a continuing conversation. And like you just saw, like, we'll take that, we'll see what you're coming up with, and we'll give you feedback. And then when possible, we'll implement those changes into our products too.
Really cool. Really cool. One of the cool implementations that I think this is probably more Jim than Nathan, but on page 98, we have the life path summary, which is a visual, which for people like me, as opposed to having something spread out over 3 or 4, 5, 10 pages and having tried to figure it out in my mind. The flow chart is really good. That was more you, Jim, right? Your design.
I mean, part of it was you too, because we worked on those flow charts in Captain's Log to try to bring it a little bit together.
Credit to Josh Allen.
Of course, Josh Allen. But also the first edition core rule book had sort of a flow chart in it. It had a 1-pager that said, here's character summary and character creation. Me personally, I found it really hard to read because it was LCARs and it was a lot of buttons, and it was like I was a little confused on where everything went. But it was just an opportunity to try something different, and we got good feedback on the Captain's Log flow charts, and I was like, okay, well, let's try that again. And fortunately, our graphic design team, our amazing graphic design team, took the text and massaged it and put it together to where it, the arrows and stuff kind of make sense and works, I think. So yeah, I mean, what's funny is that I see a lot of fan feedback who are like fans are just now starting to get into second edition, starting to read it, and they have a lot of questions about character generation. And I'm just like, I'm always kind of politely pointing, the flowchart on page 98 might help you if you're looking for page references or like a summary of things to do. So I think a lot of fans in other game systems like aren't familiar or just don't have access to good flowcharts. And not to say that this is a good one, right? I don't know. We'll get fan feedback on that, but just trying to find new ways to make the book not just a cool book, but also a really useful tool to use.
Good. And then if we go over to page 144, that's good about the life path there. Let's talk about supporting characters. And Nathan, just so I have it on record, because I'm going to tell you right now that, and this is my fault, my players always correct me on it, but in 1E, I kind of treated my supporting characters like the other characters on the ship like NPCs. Now they are NPCs. I understand they're non-player characters, but because once you activate them, they become a supporting character. Can you just give us that blurb definition?
The actual text of the rulebook points out. It's actually way back in the introduction to the game. So if I can find it in the text.
In the original 1E or 2?
In both, actually. When it introduced, but there's a moment where it introduces the concept of there we go on what you need to play. It's like way back on page 6.
Okay.
It points out that you have player characters within the category of player characters. You have a main character and you have supporting characters. Supporting characters are still player characters. They're just a different category of it. Non-player characters are the characters that the GM controls.
Got it. Okay, so that's so important because it's always been that way. I know that, but it's always kind of how it's screwed it up for me is when I went to design our characters, then I was, for instance, said, okay, let me get an assistant chief engineer they can talk to, and I would design them like a minor NPC. Which is not how you design a supporting character. They get better stats in a sense. So that's where it really got me.
They do a little. One thing I actually did with my original campaign group, a campaign group that ran from like the end of the playtest through for about a year or so before real life intervened. And I had a whole stack of index cards that were used for supporting characters. At the top of the stack was a very brief summary of what you needed to do to create a supporting character, what the array of stats were, what other choices you needed to make a supporting character. And then this stack of index cards underneath it that were the supporting characters themselves that had been filled in. And I left that in the middle of the table for the players to do, because the players create the supporting characters, not me. That's my job to do it. It's because it's their crew. I've always had this philosophy that the ship, the main characters, and the supporting characters all belong to the players.
Love that.
Non-player characters are always external to that.
Love that.
So sure, you've got the entire ship's crew, all the supporting characters, all the ones that aren't even supporting characters. They're the security team trait that your chief of security has created to back them up in this situation. All of those are all the players have complete ownership over that. But then the independent scientist or the Federation bureaucrat or the admiral or the ambassador or whatever that has come onto the ship for this week's episode, those are NPCs. Those are mine to control, and I can use those to cause trouble and inflict drama upon upon proceedings.
So then let's talk about red shirts. I'll pull a little conversation me and Jim had into this before. The supporting characters still, though, kind of need to up the ante. So, Jim, we had a conversation before, and I said, "Oh, what if they bring all supporting characters onto an away team?" That's boring. That's boring to me because I want the narrative spotlight to stay on the main crew. That's what I want. And so Jim was like, "Well, show them that supporting characters don't necessarily have plot immunity." So sure enough, in my last adventure, they did an away team with two people that were not the main characters. One of them did not make it back. So Nathan, what would you talk to people advice about the red shirt theory?
That's even the idea that supporting characters can be red shirts was baked in from the beginning. There are rules to cover them getting died and even dying to prevent and player character suffering harm, or a main character from suffering harm. But I think we've leaned into that a little bit more with second edition because a brand new supporting character has no stress points, and thus cannot avoid an injury.
Correct.
If those brand new supporting, you bring down, to borrow a name from one of my original campaigns, supporting characters, Ensign MacGuffin. You bring him down on an away mission, and he gets shot. He's going down. You might be able to provide medical attention or whatever, but there's no way for him to avoid that injury. The only way for a supporting character to gain essentially that level of plot armor is to bring them back in a later episode and give them a value as one of their improvements.
I love that.
Because at that point they gain a bit of stress to shield themselves with. And at that point, you start to get a sense of the character, not just the extra running around in a uniform.
Mm-hmm. And that's all in the hands of the players, right? Mm-hmm. So players, this is just a reminder to you that you have quite a bit of agency with this game. So if there's a supporting character that you like, pay some attention to them, develop them like an O'Brien, and don't let them be a one-off like what was it, Ensign Gaetano in the Galileo 7 who got
there's so many.
Killed. I mean, there's a lot.
Yeah. I can't count, Jim. So, yeah. Well, and again on page 147, a beautiful simple flow chart as a reminder of how to whip it. So similar to your index card, I guess you transposed it into this flow chart.
It's the same information, certainly. I didn't build any of the flowcharts. I attempted to, but I was working in Word, and unfortunately, because we share a lot of files around through Google, which tends to convert Word docs into Google Docs, and you lose a load of formatting stuff, which caused problems whenever I attempted to do anything more graphical than bullet point lists or tables. So I happily leave that up to our graphics team to handle all of those. It's just it wasn't in the cards for me to be involved in any of that that presentation.
Got it. Makes sense.
Yeah. One thing I want to touch on real quick is creation and play. I think I love life path systems. When I got first edition, I loved the life path system, and that's what I went with. But I think within the last 3 years, I think not just developing Captain's Log, but also developing second edition, but also just as a player evolving, I've really come to like creation and play more than life path, if only because I think creation and play, for me anyway, really ties into the idea of how we discover characters while we're watching Star Trek, right? Because like the writers and the actors, they kind of have a notion of what the character is, and they've got basic ideas and stuff, but then they don't really start adding more on until they do more episodes, and the writers and the actors get into it and they start developing things, and all of a sudden by the end of the series you've got a fully realized character, whereas at the beginning you may not quite know all the details. And I really like that idea, and so I've started like the next game I run, I wanted to do creation and play. I don't want to use life path, not that I don't like life path, but I just think I like the idea of discovering as you go. And my players in the last couple of games I've run always wanted to kind of respec after a couple sessions. They're like, oh, I kind of like this, but I want to change a couple of things. It's like, okay, and I'm happy to do it. But then it made me realize, well, if we use creation and play, then we don't have to respec. We can just build it as we go, right? And it's exactly what you want it to be. So I guess, and Nathan, I think we had a couple conversations early on about maybe making creation and play the primary, and then having life path being presented second in the book. I know I didn't pull the trigger on that to make the decision, but just
I think life path was always going to be the shiny one that draws a lot of attention, especially to people coming to a game new for the first time, especially drawing from that that tradition of players with player characters who like to write a backstory for their character beforehand, who like to know their character before before session one begins, or for the players that just like to create characters in their spare time. Creation and play almost, as the name might suggest, doesn't really suit creating a character in advance just because you like creating characters, because it's built around just getting into the game and with the bare minimum and exploring who that character is with the dice rolling.
Yeah, for sure. I think next time we're finishing up a season and then we're gonna launch another season. I'm gonna encourage my players to go creation and play on it, just really forcing them narratively to push like creating as they go along. I think that's super fun. Speaking of character development, on page 166, milestones, how have they changed between 1E and 2E? What do you want to highlight about that?
Oh, everything. So the milestone rules were significantly overhauled halfway through the lifespan of first edition. We had gotten a load of fairly unimpressed feedback, to put it mildly, on milestones. And while some of that was people looking for a more traditional, more, I'd say, D&D-esque style of character advancement, with bigger, more frequent improvements to your stats and skills and things like that. That was never a direction that I wanted to go with Star Trek, even way back in first edition. But in first edition, I've never the actual text of the advancement rules were very much a late development that I never really got the chance to hammer out to my satisfaction. What ended up in the book was somewhat lackluster, I will admit. So I pushed Jim to let me rewrite the character advancement and reputation systems for the Klingon core book, because we wanted we had an opportunity to polish up some of our presentation anyway, and this was something that I thought really needed a ground up rework. And I'm quite proud of what we ended up with what, and as it's pointed out on the sidebar on page 168, is that it's player-facing character advancement. The idea that it's not milestone advancement as you hear about in a lot in D&D and many other games, where you level up when the GM says you do. It's milestone advancement in that you're the one choosing the path your character is taking, and you're the one that chooses what the significant milestones for your character are. So it's tied into your character's choices, your character's beliefs, specifically their values. And as your character pushes those and leans into or challenges and tests their personal beliefs, that's how they grow as a person, and that's how they develop, and that's how they gain these mechanical advancements as well.
Yeah, it's excellent.
So yeah,
I mean, I know. I was saying, like, we in our game, again, talking about how you can adapt this, we haven't used reputation. We didn't do it. And I think it's because the first book kind of had it, but this is the Klingon I call it the Klingon adaptation to the reputation rule, like you were mentioning, would definitely make it easier to manage now. Because at the end of the game, you just do a quick review of the questions and move on, right? Make your choices.
Yeah, the reputation role and the idea of that kind of thing, that the nugget at the heart of that idea was still there in the original reputation system. It wasn't fully formed. I hadn't had enough time to really put the work into it. So I tried to I fleshed it out with the Klingon book, and I've produced at the time we produced an alternate set of positive and negative influence questions for Starfleet crews as well, which we released as a free download alongside the Klingon book if you wanted to backport these across to a Starfleet game rather than the Klingon one. But I think the key element that makes the reputation system work better here now is the uses of acclaim and reprimands, essentially as extra fuel for a bit of world building, a bit of character development, and as prompts for adventures. You've got, with your acclaim, yes, you've got access to potential mechanical benefits through taking awards and things like that, but you can also get your promotions. You can get favors from and contacts amongst NPCs and gain some status and a bit of getting an extra traits because you've achieved something notable and things like that. And on the reverse side of it, with the reprimands, you've got the opportunity to make enemies, to gain a little bit of infamy from things that you've been involved in. If you happen to say start the Federation Klingon War.
So if I'm playing a Klingon campaign, then can I base it completely off this, or again, there's going to be some differences if I use the Klingon core rulebook, right?
So the differences between the Klingon core rulebook version and this version are the questions for what your for when you make the reputation roll, what your positive and negative influences are, because obviously Klingons have different expectations of Klingon warriors than Starfleet does of personnel. So Starfleet frowns on killing in a way that Klingons don't, amongst other things. So there are differences in those questions, but you can literally just port that list of questions from the Klingon core book into second edition, no issue, because the rest of the mechanics are basically the same. The other differences are in the reprimands table. The options that basically for the points that you gain when you do badly on a reputation roll, because the Klingons have different sets of punishments, and there are things like discommendation and matters of shame and dishonor on the Klingon table that aren't necessarily on the Starfleet one in the core book, in the 2E core book. But the 2E core book also includes things like being locked up in the brig for an episode, and now you've got to play a supporting character because your main character's been incarcerated, or if you do really badly, spending 5 of your reprimand points on being arrested and court-martialed, which is amazing opportunity because court-martial episodes are always the best.
And I have a question for you too. I'm just curious how you play this narratively. I mean, I don't want to be giving out awards and promotions every single episode. So I'm more, let's take it to an arc, and all of a sudden your actions will eventually get, this is why we didn't do reputation, because we said we're going to let the story drive promotions, demotions, and stuff like that. How do you play it? I'm curious. Every time you sit down with your group, did you dish out awards and commendations?
So the last time I played a long campaign was actually before these newer ones had been written, but we did roll for reputation every session, and in fact the option to commend another character that's now in the acclaim list came about from that original campaign. I think it ended up being an option in the command sourcebook in first edition. Because I would always ask the captain in my group to roll his reputation first, and there weren't that many things. There wasn't really anything for him to get from it beyond just an improved status, because obviously those rules are fairly bare bones. But he felt like he wanted to be able to go to point at another character in the group and go, they did really well. I'm putting a commendation in their record and actually have that have an effect. So we worked that into the rules, and it does give your commanding officer a little bit of a leeway to reward behavior that they think works.
God, and it's possible. Just a question about it. It's possible in this new system to gain enough to end with some acclaim, but not enough to get any of the benefits, right?
Yes, there are some. There are some of those, and they have varying costs, and some of them can be quite expensive.
And then it fades away. You don't carry it into the next episode, correct?
I believe so. I can't actually remember.
Yeah, it says. Well, it says here.
Yes, they must be spent immediately. You can't you can't coast on past successes. So
okay, cool.
There are
awesome.
There are options for just one. There are a couple of one acclaim options. So if you've only got 1 point of acclaim, one from a roll, you can get a favor with a fairly middling NPC that you encounter during that adventure. But anything really significant probably costs 2, 3, or more. And the awards on the following pages, from 173 onwards, the cheapest one of them costs 2. The most expensive one costs 5.
Yeah.
And all of them have, or most of them, I think there's only 1 or 2 of them that have that don't have a condition that the character must meet in order to attain that medal. You can't just spend the points and get the medal. You have to have done something worthy of getting the medal in order to spend the points on it.
Right. And again, the Klingon comparison, which I'm now figuring out from page 172, get ready for some errata, Jim. Page 172, column 2, paragraph 3, it's glory in the Klingon core rule book, but Starfleet is acclaim. And I only noticed that because the last sentence, Jim, refers to glory, errata.
Where is this?
Page 172, column 2, paragraph 3, last sentence, where it says
yes,
for
it does,
glory. Yeah.
So it does.
Yeah.
Those sneaky Klingons.
You're in a Klingon mood.
Bit of copy pasta there.
Yeah.
Awesome.
It happens.
Cool. All right. So I thought today we were going to have time for 4, 5, and 6, but we're going to just stick with chapter 4 because it is the thickest chapter in the book. Anything else you want to tell us about chapter 4 before we wrap up this episode, or Jim, you want to add?
Yeah, I'll just note real quick because I know we're going to save gratitude for later. But and Nathan, I don't remember if I told you. I think I told you, but if not, I'll tell you again. I really appreciate that you took the effort to go through all of the other supplements and pull all those talents out and pull all the talents in here and revise as many as you could to fit them in here. I was really hoping that we could just max out the number of talents in the core book just to give new players and fans and existing players just a ton of options right out of the core book, right? As opposed to doing the supplement stream like we did with first edition. So I really appreciate the work that you put. I mean, there's like 150 talents in this book, which is awesome. And, I did have a moment where I thought about cutting because we had to cut so many pages out of the core book. And I was like, no, I'm keeping the talents. That was like one of the things I told myself, like, I'm keeping the talents. I'll cut other stuff if I have to, but just wanted to appreciate how much effort you put into that. So thank you.
Yeah, it was a fun section to work on, actually. Just to polish up those talents and nice little nuggets of rules that are easy enough to put together and then move on.
Well, again, more combinations makes each character in Star Trek Adventures singular and distinct, which is why we love it. All right, the conversation continues. Come back next week. We're going to have more with game designer, our 2D20 game designer, Nathan Dowdell, and Star Trek Adventures 2nd edition. Until next time, IDIC.
Live long and prosper. Be safe, be well. We'll talk to you next time.